So this is a practice, obviously, that is very well worthwhile to take on the road, and that is between sessions. It's a bit tame, pretty much, when we're just sitting quietly observing what comes up. But when we're out engaging with the reality around us during the retreat, for people listening by podcast, as you engage with the reality wherever you are, and for those of us here in 3 weeks when we're somewhere else, then to see as we go to the airport, we're going here, we're going there, to see, to continue this Vipashyana practice. That's where it really gets real. It starts to become very meaningful. So now we pick up with the root text, as I said. From within the foregoing equipoise. Okay, you know that from the foregoing equipoise, you know that it means exactly the foregoing achievement of shamatha, in which you've actualized, realized the relative nature of your mind. From within the foregoing equipoise, you should, like a minnow swimming in limpid water without disturbing it. Limpid means clear and transparent, brightly lit. So just slipping through, right? No perturbation, no waves, no stirring up silt and dirt and so forth, just slipping through. This is the subtlety of your awareness, that you just let it slip through and observe what's arising in the space of the mind. Like a minnow, a very small fish, swimming in limpid water without disturbing it, analyze wisely with subtle awareness the manifest nature of the one who meditates. Manifest nature, I've explained how that's different from the essential nature. With subtle awareness, well, your coarse awareness is what you're using in your ordinary, with a coarse mind when you've not achieved shamatha. And so he's saying, when he said equipoise and he says subtle awareness, this is a direct reference to having fully achieved shamatha and using that as your basis for venturing into Vipassana, which is really the way this should be done, optimally. So when Gelug Mahamudra was leading a 1-year shamatha retreat in 1988, well, it was just shamatha all the way through. He wasn't peppering it with a bit of Vipassana and stage regeneration, and let's do some tummo. It was just, let's do shamatha. And that's what we did for a year. So thus without wavering, so here's his commentary. That was the root text. Here's his commentary to his own text. Thus without wavering in the slightest, so not even subtle excitation, without wavering in the slightest from the previous equipoise that is settled single-pointedly in serene concentration, that's the samadhi of shamatha. As, for example, a minnow swims without disturbance in the midst of a lake full of limpid water. From within that equipoise, you should analyze the subtle consciousness with subtle consciousness. And that's what your coarse mind is dissolved into. So with that subtle stream. Now what's happening here, this is very important, is when you achieve shamatha for a while, it's a distant analogy, but like the Buddha having achieved enlightenment and then simply dwelling in that enlightenment for 49 days before setting out, walking to Saranat. Okay, there's on the top of the mountain. Way down in the foothills of the mountain. When you achieve shamatha, there's certainly nothing wrong with enjoying it for a while. 49 days might be a bit much, but at least, for a few days, just enjoy resting in that bliss, luminosity, and non-conceptuality. Give yourself a little pat on the back. But don't hang up too long. Don't get addicted to it. But then you go back into shamatha, and then you're resting there for a little while, and then you turn on the switch. Bearing in mind, the real point of achieving shamatha was not bliss, luminosity, and non-conceptuality. If you want bliss, there are drugs for that. If you want luminosity, there are drugs for that. If you want non-conceptuality, a sharp blow to the frontal cortex will do it. There are various ways of getting non-conceptuality, general anesthesia, etc. So if that's all you want, there are much, much easier ways of getting it, right? Those are very nice. In fact, they're very meaningful. But the real point of that is you now have the 5 dhyana factors at your fingertips. The 5 obscurations are subdued. Your mind is supple, it's clear, it's light, buoyant, and ready to be put to work. So you're resting there for a short time in the substrate consciousness, and then from that equipoise, you activate your mind. You activate it. So you don't simply rest in the substrate consciousness, aware of the substrate. You activate it, you turn it on, and then you start engaging in the investigation. So from within that equipoise, you used to analyze with subtle consciousness the manifest nature of the individual or I who meditates in concentration. You can imagine this would be very, very different if you achieve Shamatha. If you're already finished. And there you are in this, like in Carnegie Hall, like in a room with perfect acoustics, and it's pin drop silent. Right? Something like that. Pin drop silent. You're in a space that's non-conceptual. And it's got great acoustics. Your clarity is just blazing. And now you're going to examine carefully the I who meditates, the I who is the meditator, the I who is resting there. You're going to investigate that. And now, in these three ways, you're going to and analyze with subtle consciousness the manifest, that is what is evident, what you can examine, nature of the individual or I, who meditates in concentration. And how do you analyze? You analyze its way of existing, its a way of appearing to the intellect, or to your mind, and its way of being grasped or apprehended. Analyze all this subtly and astutely with precise and discriminating mind. Well, again, if you achieve Shamatha, that will be a very different experience than probably the one you just had. When you analyze thus, you see that the way of abiding of an individual, how the individual is present. Here we have the way of existence, the way of appearance. The way of abiding, so it's ne luk or ne tsul, the way of abiding of an individual, an I, a person, and so forth. You see that the way of abiding, how phenomena are present, how you are present, but then more generally, the way of abiding, the way of presence, the way of existence of all phenomena. You will see, when you analyze this, that the way of existence of all phenomena is merely nominal, merely conceptually imputed, merely designated, as a snake is imputed on a striped rope, or a person is imputed on a cairn or a pile of sticks. But he really jumped to the end there. He gave you the beginning, he gave the end. Okay? But he said, this is what you see. So it's clearly leading the witness. But if you can come to that conclusion, not just indoctrinate yourself or memorize the right answer, if you can see that, well, you'll be very grateful that he guided you to that insight, because it turns out to be an enormously liberating insight, and not just getting the right answer, the correct answer from a Madhyamaka perspective. So you'll see that the I is merely nominal. It's just a name. It's simply something conceptually designated. And as a snake is designated or imputed on a striped rope, that is, where the striped rope is, there is no snake whatsoever. But you impute it on it. The striped rope is the basis of your false designation of it being a snake, or a cairn or a pile of sticks, so a pile of rocks or a scarecrow or whatever, and then looking upon that, and then mistaking that for a person. So here it might be helpful to draw a distinction I've seen very, very clearly articulated in the Dzogchen teachings on Vipashyana, and especially Vipashyana, nature of emptiness. And that is, there are many, many references to the appearances to the five senses, and objects. It's nama and yur. So there are the appearances and then the objects, right? So I'll speak just briefly here from the Dzogchen perspective. It's certainly very relevant to this, even though it slows us down in getting through the text. The appearances are they're just happening, they're just arising, right? They're just coming up. They're colors, they're sounds, they're shapes in the scene, let to be just the scene. That's what you're seeing, just the appearances arising. Appearance is not as anything else, and they're nameless. The appearances don't name themselves. There are no names. There are no concepts in appearances. There are no concepts in colors, shapes, smell, sound, taste, and so forth. There are no concepts there. There are no labels. There are no ideas. They are just what they are. And of course, being what they are just appearances, which means there's nothing more to them. So being just an appearance, that means they are empty appearances, which is to say they're empty of anything else. They're not stuffed with something else, like something substantial, real, and inherently existent, right? So they're appearances. That struck me as, again, I was just kind of sitting quietly before coming here. This marvelous phrase, I think it's actually the most memorable, or one of the most memorable, in Ledab Lingpa's quintessential pith instruction on settling the mind in its natural state. Right towards the end, he says, now when you become, I'm paraphrasing closely, he said, when you become well familiarized with this practice, you will have a non-conceptual certainty that nothing can harm, within the context of observing your mind, right? You'll have a non-conceptual certainty that nothing can harm your mind whether or not thoughts have ceased. It's a very interesting phrase, because he's saying thoughts may still arise, but you have a non-conceptual awareness of the thoughts, which implies, of course, no cognitive fusion, right? So you're thinking thoughts, as I gaze over Paula is simply appearing to me, but there's no fusion. I'm just non-conceptually, I can be aware of the appearance of Paula. Similarly, you can be non-conceptually aware of the appearances, the thoughts, the images, memories, fantasies, desires, emotions, intentions, and so on. And you do have the possibility of having that non-conceptual awareness of them. But in that, and it was just a straight shamatha practice, it's not a Vipashyana practice, but to my mind, it's the most insight-rich approach to shamatha that I know of, I put it that way. That in seeing, and you're doing exactly what Buddha told Bahia to do. In the mentally perceived, let there be just the mentally perceived, right? And so you're seeing all these things coming up. You're not cognitively fusing with them. You're not imputing, projecting labels, associations, thoughts, and so forth and so on. You're not reifying them. You're just seeing appearances as appearances. And in so doing, you see them as empty. And seeing them as empty, you know intuitively or non-conceptually, it doesn't matter what comes up. It can be Godzilla, it can be Jesus, it can be anything. I just did a big spectrum there. But it can be anything. Something most benign and magnificent and sacred to the most disgusting and terrible and horrendous. And it doesn't matter. None of them have any capacity to harm you, any more than you see a good movie or a bad movie. A comedy or a horror movie. There's appearances on the screen. They're just appearances on the screen, right? So those are appearances. On the basis, but then in the Dzogchen literature says there are appearances to the five senses, and of course to the sixth. And then there are objects. And the objects are those things that the mind designates, imputes, upon the basis of appearances, right? So I see, where's Mary Kay? She was there. She said, there's a vacuum. I'm seeing an emptiness of Mary Kay. Okay, kind of getting used to you there. There's just an appearance there. As I gaze over now, Mary Kay is, being the tricky person that she is. She confuses me. There's the appearance of Mary Kay. Now she's gone again. The appearance, and on the basis of that appearance, as I look, she's about 15 feet away. On the basis of that, then he says, oh, there she is. There she is, right? There's just an appearance. The appearance doesn't have Mary Kay built into it. Doesn't have any label, any name, or anything of the sort. Doesn't have person built into it. The appearance, just an appearance. But on the basis of that appearance, then I say, where's Mary Kay? And Mary Kay is an object now, an object of my mind. And Mary Kay does have a name. In fact, she is a name. But she's not in the nature of appearance. And therefore, she's not out there. She's not out there to be found. And that's why. It sounds retrospectively like, why did you even look? When you see how she appears, how she exists, and how you apprehend. When you see that, when you've really, really inspected that, maybe more than one session, maybe for a year, then you'll see that Mary Kay as an object, not simply an appearance, an empty appearance just arising, but as an object, a person over there. And then I'm pointing my finger very deliberately. A person over there, right? Well, she's Mary Kay. She's a person that my mind has designated on the basis of appearances, which means if I should examine the appearances, the appearance of her body, all the body parts, all the processes of her mind, and I'm looking for, it's almost like a joke. Like, you already know the answer. You really think Mary Kay is going to be found among her body parts? Or her mental processes? Or do you think she's going to be existing maybe in the neighborhood, hanging out in the proximity of her body and mind? The whole thing kind of looks like you knew the answer already, right? If you designated her, if she doesn't exist independently of that designation, then of course she's not going to be found there. And she's not going to be found in your mind either. Mary Kay is not going to be found in my mind. She's a person. She's not a figment of my imagination. So she's not going to be found over here. She's not going to be found in between. She's not going to be found in the appearances over there. She's an object. And that goes for every other object in the universe, from elementary particles up to galaxies and so on. The objects are those things that we designate on the basis of appearances. Appearances are empty. The appearances are empty of real objectivity, of there's something being really there. A rainbow is a classic example, one of the 10 that the Buddha often gave. You look at the rainbow, you can photograph it and all of that. It has causal efficacy, it makes you smile, it's a beautiful rainbow. And there it is. And yet it's nothing more than an appearance. Nothing more than an appearance. You know that it doesn't exist. If everybody around you closes their eyes, it's not there. Right? It's not there in the nature of the photon. It's not out there in space. Even though the camera lens says it is, well, in fact it's not. Otherwise you could see it from multiple angles, from the bottom up, from the back, from the side. Wouldn't that be interesting to photograph a rainbow from the side, just see a narrow sliver? Well, of course it never happens because it's not there, right? And so this is a useful distinction. When we find objects from elementary particles, but also objects that are subjective, and that is an emotion, impatience, that's an object. We can observe it, right? It's something we designate upon appearances, but not the same as the appearances. So this goes objectively as well as subjectively. As soon as we've designated an object, whether it's out there or it's in here, it's designated on the basis of appearances, and the appearances are empty of that designated object. I introduced earlier the distinction between basis of designation and designated object. Here's a crucial point. If you miss this one, you'll miss everything. And that is, whatever you've identified as the basis of designation, like Anne-Marie's face, for example, the appearance of Anne-Marie's face, whenever you identify something as a basis of designation for the object that you designated upon it, that which you've identified as the basis of designation wasn't already the basis of designation. It wasn't inherently, by its own nature, the basis of designation for what you designated upon it. It's the basis of designation only because you designated something on it. But it's not objectively even a basis of designation. It's just an appearance, and appearances have no names. Which means, in fact, appearances are, and this comes up in Shamatha, mind-only school a lot, appearances are ineffable. Appearances are ineffable. And that is, if you're talking to someone, for example, I mean, it's kind of obvious, so I'll be really short, but imagine you're tasting chocolate, and it's right in your mouth, you know exactly what it is, and you want to now explain the nature of the taste you're experiencing right now to a person who's never experienced anything sweet. You don't even know how to start. And imagine they've memorized every dictionary on the planet. They know all the definitions, right? You can't even start. Because I'm sorry, but I've had this ineffable, inconceivable experience that I will call the taste of chocolate, but you'll have no idea what I'm talking about. But you might, if you like, check out its chemical composition. But it won't give you even a hint of what it's like. Not even a taste of a taste. Appearances have no names. Objects do, because we designated them. And that's for everything. Elementary particles, galaxies, the sun, moon, asteroids, and everything else. Okay, we have to get through this text. A sutra says, it appears, it, yourself, you, the individual you're examining here, it appears just as does a Gandharva city, a city, let's say, of leprechauns or fairies, something like that, something very elusive, something not objectively real. That city exists in none of the 10 directions. It's not really anywhere, not truly located anywhere. In other words, that city is merely nominal. Thus is this realm seen by the Sugata. So that is the domain of reality seen by a Buddha. We should see things as the Tathagata does. That would be a good idea. Good. And really taking that to heart in a very practical way. Very practical. And I've mentioned it before now very briefly. But when you're settling the mind as natural state, you're observing all this stuff coming up, including mental afflictions and nagging thoughts and memories and blah, blah, all the kind of stuff. Insofar as possible, seek to view them as if from the Buddha mind, as if the mind viewing them was the Buddha mind, which is non-dual from your own awareness. And how would the Buddha perceive? The Buddha really sitting right where you are. How would the Buddha perceive your own mental afflictions, your thoughts, memories, emotions, and so forth? Well, just for starters, of course the Buddha is not going to be harmed by them. Impossible. The Buddha will see them discerningly, utterly untouched by them, without reification, and yet see them as they are. Thus, when we are mistaken, when we are unmistaken, this is not only for the self, but for all phenomena should appear as mere names, all those objects that we have designated should appear as mere names. This is how they should appear to us, if we're seeing things as they are. All phenomena should appear. How do they appear? They should appear as mere names with merely imputed existence. Knowing perfectly well they weren't already there. That's not how they were from their own side. It's imputed. When they do not appear thus, when we see them in another way, namely as if they appear as if they really do exist from their own side, when they do not appear thus, we are possessed by the demon of ignorance. And the way they exist appears mistakenly. In other words, their mode of existence and the mode of appearances are contrary to each other. Like a liar who appears to be very, very honest and yet is completely dishonest. So the way they exist appears mistakenly, and by fixating on that, we collect karma. Fixating on that, well, that means, of course, reification. As soon as we fixate on that, we reify that, then we collect karma. That's when the big karma engine starts rolling. And by the power of this karma, we wander in samsara and experience various sufferings. So he just gave the mechanics of all of samsara right there. Now, when the essence is nakedly revealed, how they actually exist is nakedly seen, directly seen, then such a way of appearing and such a way of fixation are asserted respectively as the appearance of the object of negation. The object of negation, of course, is something that doesn't exist, but we apprehend that something that doesn't exist, but appears to. And the object of negation is something that doesn't exist, but we apprehend it as existing. So then such a way of appearing and such a way of fixation are asserted respectively as the appearance of the object of negation, its way of appearing as truly established, that means truly existent, and the way of grasping it to existence, or the way of fixation. Thus, for us ordinary individuals, that is non-Aryas, the object of negation has no other way of appearing to reasoning apart from the way present appearances arise. That is, the object of negation really appears to be there from its own side. That's how things appear. Because all cognitions in the mind stream of an ordinary individual are contaminated by ignorance. It gets right there into the mode of appearances themselves, so any object that appears as truly existent. So it's very, very dense, but he is clear. Thus, based on the ascertainment that persons and phenomena exist merely imputedly, one ascertains accordingly that the root of samsara is our way of grasping an I, that is, connate grasping at I. We're born with it, not something we learned. For based on such a realization, one is able to thoroughly ascertain our way of apprehending the subtle object of negation. So it's often said the first step to insight is to see how ignorant you are or how confused. That's the first big step. The first big step in shamatha is to recognize how chaotic your mind is. There are parallels all over the place. Here in this, setting out on this path of Vipashyana, the first great milestone is to recognize how phenomena such as yourself appear in a way that is deceptive, misleading, and how you grasp to them in a false way, a mistaken way. Grasp to them as if they really exist. independently of your conceptual designation, independently of your names. That in fact, they were already just waiting for a name, and it happened to be a German name, a French or Italian, doesn't matter. They really are already, and they're just waiting for the right name. That would be the inherent existence of something. It's already there, independent of, irrelevant to your conceptual designation of it. Thus, the omniscient Je Tsongkhapa stated this in many ways. For example, and here's a quote from him, there is the demonstration that all phenomena exist imputedly, that's how things actually are, and opposite to that, or contrary to that, the way of identifying the object of negation. So it's really seeing reality, just like you can be in a non-lucid dream and then shift your perspective and so view the same dream from a lucid perspective. Same phenomena, but of course they're entirely different viewed from this perspective and that perspective. This one's delusional. You think everybody's really out there. And here you've just shifted over to lucid and you see all the same appearances, but now you're not delusional. So in a similar fashion, you can view phenomena, you can see them, view them as existing imputedly. You can see how they are there, how their mode of existence is one that exists only, that is, they exist only relative to the way they are imputed. You can see that. Or then you can fall back into non-lucidity and you can be, how do you say, just seeing the objects of negation as something that's real. Okay, grasping onto it as real. With regard to these ways, some of those reputed as lordly scholars who claim to be guides for many sentient beings are ambiguous in their writings. So not all of the great scholars of Tibet or India had really seen this point. Only those holy ones who have made practice essential have sufficient greatness of mind to be reliable. So it's not enough just to study the text, to be really clever and logical and so forth. And in fact, I've seen this because I studied quite a bit of philosophy when I was at Stanford. And then I've known a lot of very fine scholars in the Tibetan tradition. And there's some commonality there. For those scholars who really don't spend much time practicing, I mean, like no meditation, but they're studying and memorizing, teaching and debating, and then studying, meditating, and reciting and teaching and so forth. And philosophers in Western academia, I mean, it's kind of the same, pretty much. They're studying and they write and they research and they debate and they write critiques of others and they get critiqued themselves. It's very similar. They're philosophizing. And I've noted a common characteristic. Lung. Stressed out. I've seen this a lot among intellectuals. This is what they're doing. This is their bread and butter. This is how they make a living. They make a living stressing themselves out with their intellect. It's all there at the top of the pyramid. It's all exercise of the clarity, the vividness, the acuity, the sharpness. Oh, this philosopher is so sharp. Oh, this debater, this geshe is so sharp. That's good. Nothing wrong with that. That's the tip of the pyramid. They're exercising the tip of the pyramid. Do they have any stability underneath that? Do they have a sense of ease? And the answer is some of them do. Kapche Rinpoche, he was like a Buddha. He's just so firm, so solid, so relaxed, so deep. Kapche Tijin Rinpoche the same. Geshe Taige certainly had so much energy, but also, boy, when he showed us Shamatha and he sat for 3 hours like a stone Buddha, you can't fake that. Nobody can fake that. So this is why Geshe Rabten said, when he was telling me his life story, because he was an outstanding debater, he was really, really first rate. But he said, a lot of the debaters in the Soul Geshe training program, they're out on the debating courtyard. In Tibet, they'd debate like 8 hours a day. We only 5 hours a day in India. And then they'd come back and they'd study and study and study and memorize more texts and study, and then back to the debate. And they'd lose some debates and they'd said, oh, okay, I know I can win that debate next time. And they go back and forth between debating and then studying the text, memorizing, debating, and that would be all it. And then they could get a very high degree as a geshe. He said, well, it's a straight ticket to getting lung. He didn't say that, but it is. Lung, just getting totally stressed out, high-strung, irritable, edgy, and frankly, not very happy. I can't remember. I'm just trying to think how many really happy Western philosophers do I know? cheerful, happy-go-lucky, light-hearted. They're not known for that. You know. And he said the proper way, and he was teaching me this just before I launched into that education program myself. Go out on the debating courtyard, you debate, you try to win the debate, of course, do your very best, and then you come back right from the debating courtyard and go back to meditation. Whatever you learned on the debating courtyard, put it right into practice. And then study, prepare for the next, and then go out and debate, and then right back to practice. Apply it in meditation. And then he did that. He spent 19 years getting his Geshe degree, and then after a little bit of supplementary study after that, off to retreat for 6 years, living in a cowshed. So he really walked the walk. Yeah. So, as Gelug Mahamudra Gyatso says, the consolations of arrogant scholars trailing the mighty sun of the excellent mind, he's referring to Losang Tapa, who is Tsongkhapa, say that things truly exist by their own characteristics and intrinsic nature. Through their own mind's settled awareness, seeing the meaning of negating objects of negation bound by conventional words, that is asserted to be the great Madhyamaka, free of extremes. So he's showing these people, you know, they may study a lot, they may think they're followers of Tsongkhapa, you know, but they just didn't get it at all. In fact, I've heard a number of Geshes say that when you enter the Geshe training, the first philosophical system you really learn and master is Sautrantika. It's very smart, and it's metaphysical realism all the way through. It is kind of like the Buddhist correlate to Newtonian mechanics. It's very useful, very practical, very sensible, and saturated by metaphysical realism, right? And that's how you cut your teeth. That's how you start. That's the first one you master. And I've heard some Geshes say, you know, a lot of people follow the Geshe training, they never really get beyond that. They study Chittamatra, Madhyamaka, and so forth. But in fact, in terms of the way they're viewing reality, they never really get beyond that. I think it's probably true. I mean, it's told me by Geshes. And so that's what he's referring to here. Whereas in contrast, through your own mind's settled awareness, now we, again, unavoidably, we're coming back to Shamatha. Through this, seeing the meaning of negating objects of negation, bound by conventional words. What does it mean to see the object of negation, that is the imputed object, the object that appears to exist by its own nature, and then to refute that? That is asserted to be the great Madhyamaka, free of extremes. Like some dream form or illusory horse or cow, like an apparition, appearances do not exist in the slightest other than as appearances in the mind. So this phrase, and this is straight Gelugpa talk, but the phrase that comes up a lot in the Nyingma and Dzogchen literature is Meching Nangwa. While not existent, they still appear. And they'll just say flat out, not existent, but they appear. And generally, just in ordinary vernacular, if we're seeing something we think might be a hallucination, like a mirage, for example, or something other, we may think is that really there? Is it maybe something in my eye? Is it really there? That happens, yeah? Then often we'll go out and want to touch it. And if we can touch it, oh, it's really there. It's really there. As if touch is somehow indicating objective reality. But that's what we mean. That is it really there? Does it exist? By and large, for the person who is unconsciously and uncritically a metaphysical realist, to exist means to really exist. And to really exist means to exist by its own nature. So this is why in Dzogchen, in this kind of ontological shock therapy, they say it doesn't exist. Phenomena, you don't exist. Your mind doesn't exist. But you still appear. One other point that came up to my mind as I was meditating before coming here, I think quite useful. And that is in this phenomenological analysis that we did, how do you, as you examine yourself, how are you present? How are you there? How do you appear? How are you apprehended? We're really trying to understand exactly what he said, the manifest nature of ourselves through careful phenomenological investigation, right? Not thinking about, analyzing, and do some conceptual trip, but actually observing very closely, like the film critic. He's not just caught up in his thoughts, thinking about all the other films he's seen Robert De Niro in, and how's Billy Crystal in this, and what's the dynamic. He's not doing that. He's really watching the show very carefully, right? Radically empirically, and then he'll draw his conclusions later. But as we do so, then we really do get very familiar with the phenomenological nature of ourselves. How are we? How do we appear? How do we apprehend ourselves? These are insights, right? We come to know on that relative level, who am I? How do I perceive myself? How do I appear to myself? And there's a lot of truth in that. And this is exactly a kunzop kidemba, a fully obscuring truth. It is a truth, it is a reality. We're not observing things that don't exist. Our manifest nature, do you see a man or a woman? How do you apprehend and so forth and so on? These are truths, these are worth investigating. But when all is said and done, when you kind of come to some firm conclusions, some clear insights, this is how I exist, this is how I appear, this is how I apprehend myself. That self that you've just been describing, which does exist, it fully obscures a deeper reality, as does relative truth altogether. So astronomers, physicists, scientists of all sorts, have done such a marvelous job. I really have only praise for just the enormous amount of knowledge, insights they've provided over the last, especially 400 years, in terms of this phenomenal world around us. Galaxies, from elementary particles, the whole thing. It's an amazing body of knowledge. Really very impressive. And so much rigor and integrity and precision. It's very, very impressive. And then they describe the world, and there are many books and documentaries and science programs and so forth. And all of that reality they're describing and doing so well at, all of that is obscuring a deeper reality. Yeah. And that's nirvana. Dhammadhatu. Our ordinary sense of self, when clearly recognized, just like scientists may have a very clear understanding of many things, of botany, of cell formation, and so forth and so on, and gaining insight into that, it's obscuring a deeper sense of identity. And that's Rigpa. We got it right, when you carefully analyze. How do you exist? How do you appear? How do you apprehend yourself? It's good. There are a lot of valid insights to be gained there, and all of that which you've gained insight into is obscuring your own nature, obscuring the possibility of seeing your own face as Dharmakaya. So to simply see it is good, but what we tend to do is we reify everything we touch. So the scientist reifies, and it's quite natural, they do what we do, they reify the world that they've understood as being absolutely out there, as we tend to reify whatever we perceive, including even a very clear sense of who we are. We tend to reify that. And so just the perception of ourselves on this relative level, just that is already obscuring a deeper reality. When we reify it, it's like burying somebody and then pouring concrete on top. We've already buried them in the dirt of conventional reality. And then we pour concrete on top of it. And that's a reification. And then you sit on top of that dried concrete and you rest in open presence. Good luck. That you'll actually penetrate through the concrete and the dirt to, the hidden reality of your own identity as a Buddha. Like some dream form or illusory horse or cow, appearances do not exist in the slightest other than appearances in the mind. Bear in mind you are in the center of your mandala. From the peak of being, the peak of conditioned existence, sipe ta, sipe tsemo, the highest, the most subtle realm or state of existence in the formless realm, all the way to hell, all the way down to the deepest. If sentient beings do not negate a subtle object of negation, if they do not see that which is to be negated, and that is the reified object of any sort, from hell to the highest summit of conditioned existence, so if sentient beings do not negate a subtle object of negation that is imputed by discrimination of individual conventionalities, okay, it's difficult talk, but if you don't negate that, then however much they may examine, however much they may know about the conventional reality of yourself or atoms or galaxies, whatever, if they don't recognize what is to be refuted, and that is the inherent nature of the phenomenon under investigation. However much they examine, however much they may know about the mind or evolution of the cosmos and so forth, however much they examine, they do not in the slightest transcend a trivial view and are slain by the self. Trivial as in, I think I'm going to say superficial. No, what? Trivial? I can't remember the Tibetan. You don't have it right on hand, do you, Anna? Tibetan. It's probably Nitsewa. Do you see it immediately? Trivial or superficial will be fine. And they're slain by the self. Well, of course, the self is self-grasping, reification of the self. They're slain. So thus, under analysis, if in the mind that conceives an individual or person or I, the individual and so forth exist as they appear, if that were the case, it would not be suitable for them to exist other than as truly existent. This is just, philosophical phrasing. That is, if they exist as they appear, then that would imply that they do truly exist. They're inherently existent. Because they appear to be inherently existent. There will be complete an agreement between how they appear and how they exist. If they in fact exist as they appear, and the appearance is delusive, then they must truly exist. Thus, an individual does not exist as it appears. An individual does not exist, and now he goes into some of the parts whole analysis, classic. And you see this right there in the Pali Canon, it's all the way through. From Pali Canon to Perfection of Wisdom, and into Dzogchen literature, you'll find this exactly the same analysis in the Vajra Essence, going through the different parts of the body. It's the same thing as you find in the Pali Canon. It's interesting to see just really common ground. So here he goes. An individual does not exist as it appears. It appears as inherently existent. That's not how it exists. An individual does not exist as body and mind taken singly. You're not your body, so that just refuted all the materialists. And you're not your mind, that refuted all the philosophical idealists. You're not either one of them individually. An individual does not exist as body and mind taken together. You're not simply the composite of the two. An individual does not exist as the 6 elements taken singly: earth, water, fire, air, space, and consciousness. You're not any one of those 6 elements. An individual does not exist as the 6 elements taken together. You're not simply a composite of an alloy of all of them together. An individual does not exist other than as the 6 elements. If you take the 6 elements, and this really that's inclusive, because the 4 elements, the 5 elements, earth, water, fire, air, space, that covers your body. And then consciousness, well, that takes care of your mind. And so if you take all of the elements of your body, and then consciousness, and then set all those aside, and then then look for yourself, the individual outside that system, well, of course you're not going to find. But again, this is all so obvious if you do see how phenomena come into existence by the power of conceptual designation. It's like my mathematics friend who saw my 30 pages of equations, said, "But Alan, I saw where this was going on the first page." Good. He was a really good mathematician. I'm really dopey. Slow. And now I'm not even that. Slower than slow. I'm actually stationary. Right? But it's being able to see the implications, cut right through it. So there it is. So in teaching that, okay, we'll just read this. In teaching that, the unexcelled guardian Nagarjuna himself says, an individual is not earth, is not water, is not fire, is not air, is not space, is not consciousness, is not all of them, so none of them individually, is not all of them collectively. Where then, apart from these, is the individual? So instead of analyzing the self in terms of the 5 skandhas, he does it in terms of the 6 elements. Can you find yourself in earth, water, fire, air, or space? Or in consciousness, any one of those categories, can you find yourself? You put all those categories together, now can you find yourself? You set all those categories aside and now look for yourself outside of them, can you find yourself now? And there you go. You've just found the lack of objective existence of yourself. And I mustn't deprive you of your dinner any longer. But the next phrase, I won't read it right now, but this from the Shantideva's Bodhisattva, this is classic. It's everywhere. It's there in the Pali Canon. It's here, so that's classic Theravada, or Pali Canon. Here we have it in classic Mahayana, and you find exactly the same analysis in the Dzogchen literature. like Dujum Vajra essence and so forth, exactly the same. And it's interesting they say it because, I think for us, at least if you're anything like me, as soon as you've read teeth, hair, you're bored. Like, do you really need to go on? Did I really need to know about snot and phlegm, lymph and pus? I got it from teeth. Like, you got me at teeth. I know I'm not teeth, and that pretty much, the dominoes have fallen all the way to my toenails. Got it. But they insist on taking you this guided tour through every single body part, just to make sure that you don't still think you're hidden in some nook and cranny, Oh, you found me, I was in the gallbladder. Not there either. Or I was in the frontal cortex. Or I was in the midsection of the brain that's correlated with consciousness. Suddenly, not there either. So enjoy your evening. Come on.